Which players are high ceiling guys and which guys are high floor guys who the Jazz could take within the top 10? Let's explore that next on Locked On Jazz.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin. I'm excited to be back with you guys again this week, and I'm filling in for David Locke. As you guys know, I'm a lifelong Jazz fan who's a credentialed NBA draft analyst, attendee of the 2023 NBA Combine, soon to be the attendee of the 2024 NBA Draft Combine, as well as a attendee of the lottery, and hopefully I can bring some good luck for our Utah Jazz to move up in the draft. I also worked as a broadcast assistant and statistician the past 3 years for the Jazz, so I'm familiar with the organization, lover of statistics, can give you some geeky numbers, not quite as many as you're used to with David Locke at the helm, but also I'll give you a unique perspective as someone who's watched tons and tons of college basketball. So I'll be able to give you expert analysis on what these players are good at coming into the NBA. All right, well, thank you guys for making Locked On Jazz your first and only listen, or first listen of the day, and hopefully listen to others. And remember, Locked On Jazz is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube at Locked On Jazz, where the best way to help us grow is comment anything below. And today's question is, do you want to draft a player with a high ceiling or a high floor? Obviously, the middle ground's probably the safest answer, but I want you to pick and give me your rationale. And I've been reading all the comments, haven't responded to too many, but I've been reading them, and I intend to kind of engage more and more if there's well thought out answers here. All right, today's show is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Go ahead and download it on the App Store or on Google Play and play against your friends and decimate them as best you can, just like you would in old-fashioned Monopoly, but it's more convenient. It's on your phone. You can play with them anytime. All right, in the first segment, we'll label players with a high ceiling, saying why they are higher potential guys and maybe lower floor players. In the second segment, I'll find top 10 players who I think have very high floors, but maybe not quite as high of a ceiling, and I'll give a pitch for the Jazz to take them. In the third segment, I will look at who is available in free agency for the Utah Jazz to take a look at and potentially explore taking those guys, because I think there's a compelling pitch for a few guys, and they may not be the names you're necessarily thinking of. All right, let's dive right in. Okay, first things first, I want to get this off my chest. I don't think every player is clearly high ceiling or clearly high floor, and some can overlap in the essence of like a Venn diagram. So I will try to verbally draw that out for you guys among popular prospects that the Jazz should select. This is not me saying this guy's all the way potential, no floor. So I just want to make that clear. So let's define high ceiling. The high ceiling prospects in this class or in general are the ones I feel have a swing skill, and should they shore that up, that skill and the quote unquote hit on that skill, like for instance, Nikola Topic is one I'll talk about. If he hits on shooting, I think he makes himself a different prospect than someone who's got more refined skill sets that are less well refined. Like, I mean, they have more refined skill sets that have less to refine, is what I meant to say. So if someone quote unquote hits on their swing skill, you're getting a steal in value, and that's someone who has a higher potential than another player that you think is more surefire, steady pick, regardless of landing spot. Those are the guys that are steadier that you probably think are a higher floor. The potential is the ceiling. So that's not to say landing spot doesn't matter for guys I deem to be high floor, but I think the high ceiling guys have more volatility, and thus landing spot and development matters more. So here's an example I think that illustrates this. I think Jonathan Kuminga, who went to the Warriors at number 7, I think he was a high ceiling guy with unique traits. And his teammate Moses Moody was a little bit lower. I believe Moses Moody went 14th, and he would have been good many places. And he was a high floor guy who actually I think has had his career slowly have a little slower of an ascension because he's been buried behind perennial all-star guards for much of it. Obviously, they're not the same as they once were, but they've still been there along with an all-star and Andrew Wiggins. Another guy that was in that draft was maybe Franz Wagner. I thought his high floor, whose ceiling is higher than I thought and many others thought as well. But I think he was going to be a good player. I just didn't know how much of his ceiling, how high his ceiling was. Whereas Kuminga, I had no doubt if he fixed some things, he would be a very impactful player. And right now, Wagner is probably better than Kuminga, but I still am pretty confident with that evaluation I had. So who are the high ceiling guys I see in this draft? Let's start off with Rob Dillingham. Dillingham is a guy that I think should be good regardless. But as I've said, he's the guy in this class I think has the most potential to be an all-star, and that is as good of a player as I see in this class. As all-star player, or all-star players are good, but I don't see any perennial all-stars. They're not one and the same. Like an all-star player and a perennial all-star are very different. So if you're measuring by all-stars, you should measure by the quantity of all-stars per player. And obviously, the 2013 draft would be an exception because Giannis and Gobert have a lot of them, and then Oladipo has one. But I do think that you have to look at how many multi-time All-Stars you get out of a draft, and that tells you how great that draft is or how bad that draft is. And so I think by nature of this draft, that's a comparatively high ceiling that Dillingham, I think, can be an All-Star fairly early in his career. I don't think it's unlikely he's good at just anywhere, but I think his ceiling would be reached by landing in a pick and roll heavy system where he can use the NBA spacing and his array of shot making skills, his ability to create shots for himself and others by attacking and creating off of drop coverage, where NBA plays tons of drop, and he'll be able to punish it with off the bounce shooting. He's got the creativity to get others involved and in different ways. He can do live dribble passing, he can shoot floaters. I see him as a 22-7 type of guy, and that archetype win? Not always, because he has offense over defense, and 22-7 is good, but is it otherworldly? No. I've said Trae Young, a little bit of a watered down skill set, Trae Young, but a little more twitchy. Darius Garland are his comps, and I would say those guys aren't necessarily winners. So maybe not the perennial all-star, but both of those guys have been all-stars early in their careers, and that's high ceiling. So he'd be my first guy. The next guy that I think is the most polarizing in this draft, according to the draft community, he's got him all over the place, is Ron Holland. Holland is third on my current big board based off my preferred methodology, my preferred philosophy of top guys. And like top guys, in my opinion, should have the most chance to reach stardom. But in this class where you're drafting pieces to help a team forward rather than the dude to build around, I may tinker with my board and kind of change my philosophy for this year, but I'm not decided on that. But anyway, on to Ron Holland. He has glaring deficiencies as a shooter, and statistically, he would be eliminated by locked analytics, his analytically derived situation of can he play or not, because his bad shooting wasn't good enough to qualify as someone who would have been a positive NBA player per 6 years of data that's been pretty accurate. That Locke's been tracking, as he told you guys a few episodes ago. So if you haven't listened to that, make sure to go listen to it. But I think I can see him as RJ Barrett, and coming out, RJ Barrett had a similar weakness, not a very good shooter, but he found a way to the rim, and people saw star potential coming out of for Barrett because he found ways to impact the game, get to the rim, and impact the game on offense and defense, attack and transition, and have the ball in his hands and be successful. The reason Holland's floor is lower to me than some other people is if he can't shoot, he's a 6'6" wing, so not as big as some others in this class, sapping up some of the defensive impact despite his motor being relentless. And then if that's the case and it really doesn't hit at all, he's a little bit more Josh Okogie than a star. And that's a star on ball, because I think his best assets are his ability to attack the rim, and he figured out how to score in the G League. So I'm not going to say he's got an ineptitude offensively, but I don't think he'd be very good off of the ball unless he's able to improve his shooting and he can attack closeouts by being more of the shooter, meaning he'd get and garner more respect. I have a little more faith that he impacts offense than Josh Okogie. That's just an extreme example, but you guys get my point. The last top end pick with a high ceiling in my mind would be Nikola Topic. Topic, I think, is if his shot comes around, maybe the best player in this class based on his unique style of play, level of success in a pro league, size, and ability to process. That's all pretty rare. Topic is 6'6", 18 years old, 89th percentile in the pick and roll, and scores well around the rim without being reliant on athleticism, has deceptive burst, and just needs to be able to punish players for going under screens. So I think he can bend the defenses, unlike many in this class, with his playmaking upside and his versatility given to him by his height and guile around the rim and his incredible processing speed and decision-making on pick and rolls. So when he gets down towards the rim, he whips passes, drop-offs, and he always makes the right decision. And I think that's really, really impressive. And it's more rare than you guys would think. I'm trying to think of a comparison for you guys. I'm not always a comparison guy, but I'm trying to give you floors and ceilings. People will say Luka because he's from Slovenia. They're from the same country. But I'd actually say another one is his other countryman is Goran Dragic, who was a near all-star caliber player, but he's 4 inches taller than Dragic. So maybe Dragic or like a souped up Josh Giddey, if he hits, would be the upside. Or if he doesn't hit, I think that's something you could ask him to be. And Giddey looks like he's kind of falling out of favor in Oklahoma City. He's obviously a starter on a really good team, but I think he's kind of the odd man out there in the building blocks of the franchise. The floor is lower for him than some others if he doesn't shoot well and does not command the respect of the defense, and thus his best attributes get slightly mitigated by the lack of the threat of the shot, and his playmaking becomes less pivotal for the offense and less of a threat for the defense if he can't shoot and makes you defend him further away from the hoop. So those are the guys that I think are the most high potential guys, high ceiling, and kind of have lower floors. Though I don't think their floors are through are rock bottom. I think the lowest floor of those guys is probably Holland, and the highest ceiling, I don't know. But I think Dillingham's the best of those guys because he mixes and matches. Like the middle ground is what you really want to be. But what I'm asking you guys to do is not be ambivalent. You guys have a decision. Which do you want? Do you want a guy who can have the high ceiling at the top, even though this class may be devoid of stars, or do you want someone with a high floor that can help you build? I think I know what you guys are going to take, but I'm not going to give away my answer. Well, coming up next, we'll discuss the players that have high floors near the top of the draft. But first, let's get straight to the point, though. You want to grow your portfolio and to deal with the rising cost of inflation, to pay off your debt, your mortgage, pretty much anything standing in the way of you and financial freedom, right? With Yahoo Finance, you can get access to the news, data, and tools that you need in order to reach that financial freedom. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every single great investor. Whether you're a seasoned investor or you're looking for that extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and data you need in one place. They're the number one finance destination, producing a holistic look at the financial news cycle, including breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. Securely link your brokerage accounts for a unified view of your health, including 401k and other investments. A comprehensive perspective is what sets apart great investors, and now it's how Yahoo Finance ensures you to have the insight to look at your wealth in its entirety. With a community of over 90 million users each month, their real strength is helping you on your way to financial success. For a comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com, the number one financial destination, yahoofinance.com. That's yahoofinance.com. Well, welcome back to Locked On Jazz. Are you guys watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day long? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, can't miss analysis, opinions, and streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's get to the nitty gritty of which players have high floors and maybe better to draft this year due to the safety in selecting them and why that is. The first one to me is Alex Sarr. You got to start at the top here. Alex Sarr is the type of guy that doesn't get you fired for drafting. Sarr likely goes number one. So I guess that's not that safe of a pick because it'll be scrutinized nonetheless if he doesn't scream star. But he reminds me of Evan Mobley, who's just unbelievably solid. Mobley is a really good pro, but likely has a hard time becoming an all-star. That said, the same could be said for Chet Holmgren, though in my opinion, he's a lot better than Sarr and even better than Mobley. And all three, no hindsight bias here. I thought it was Chet Holmgren, Evan Mobley, Alex Sarr in that order coming out of the draft. But as it is, Mobley's a 16-8 player, 16 points and 8 rebounds, that is. 3 years in, and he's been really consistent at that level, and I think he may be hindered statistically by having another big playing next to him in Jared Allen. I think Mobley could have better stats, but his impact would be similar. And that's a really good value. Beyond that, you're not drafting Sarr to be your dude, much like Mobley isn't. And even though Chet, I was firmly in the camp of Paolo Banchero over Chet because I thought he could be the top guy offensively, and Chet can't. Chet is far higher of a ceiling than Sarr or Mobley because he's so skilled on offense. But back to Sarr. I think actually one more point about Chet. I really like Chet. I think Chet's ceiling is that of like a KG, a stud on all around, and someone who's really good on offense, but isn't a top scorer on a team. But he's maybe your best player in the long term. Unfortunately for his case of that, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is pretty darn good, but that makes him more of a winner, and so he'll take that any day. Sarr, I see more of the ilk of Mobley, who is a very solid foundational piece, but not someone who has the capacity to elevate your franchise and elevate your franchise from the rubble if you're continuing this housing analogy. The next player I see as a certainly high floor over high ceiling player would be Zachary Risachet. Risachet has a slight chance of hitting it big by just being an exceptional shooter. If he's that exceptional of a shooter as a weighing at 6'9", 200 pounds, the best player of this archetype that I can think of, which I think is an overly generous comp based out on what they were both coming out, would be Michael Porter Jr. Obviously, Michael Porter Jr. dealt with some injuries, and he's nowhere near being an all-star yet, though, despite being an excellent, and I mean truly excellent, role player. So that's why I think he's a high floor as opposed to a high ceiling guy, because if the best player of that archetype isn't an all-star, then you probably won't be an all-star. That said, he's gotten some light love at the top of the draft, and maybe I'm not right about that. But Porter is a monster shooter. And for those wondering, he was in a really good draft as it's turned out, and it was presumed to be. And he had a real case to go number one if his back was healthy and not terribly injured, and was a better athlete at the same stage as Zachary Risachet prior to injury. Risachet, however, figures to be a really good player because he can really shoot it, shooting as well as 48% for a good portion of the season. It tailed off towards the end in pro ball, but that happens to younger players. He's fluid, though not explosive on the ball, and he seems to be a heady player. He's a safer bet than most in what's kind of a mysterious draft to be a solid role player because he's molded perfectly for what's coveted in today's NBA. As I'm talking about this, he reminds me some of Cam Johnson. Like, as I've spoken about this, he's like, okay, who's a player that's a little worse than Michael Porter Jr., but plays similarly, isn't a great athlete? Okay, Cam Johnson's that type of guy. Well, Cam Johnson's making $24 million in his second contract. That's maximizing a role and getting paid to get better. You're getting paid to get better at shooting and playing defense and maybe being a secondary, tertiary facilitator if you really hit it big. So that's maximizing a role and getting paid to get better, another notch up. And a few years ago, that's getting paid like a star, but instead you're getting paid like a star in your role if you're hit like Cam Johnson. That's what I see for Zachary Risachet. I think Cam Johnson having 13 points a game, 39 from three is probably what you can see from Risachet by the end of his rookie contract should he hit. I don't see star potential. That's a high floor, and that ceiling's not enormous. But if he hits his ceiling, he's probably a touch better than that. So pretty darn good. Two more guys I see fitting in firmly as high floor guys are SEC standouts. That's Dalton Knecht and Reed Sheppard. Let's start with Knecht. Knecht is 23 years old, so his appeal is the immediacy in which his shooting and scoring prowess could be impactful on an NBA court. Knecht, to me, figures to be an advanced skill set marksman who adds a scoring punch as the fifth starter spot rather than a guy who gets the ball in his hands immediately. I think he has the athleticism to punish closeouts and the shooting chops and passing instincts to have offensive sets made for him. And he's an offensively gifted player. He's kind of a supplementary weapon, not the guy, but someone you have as a real threat to score on your team. And he knows how to play well enough to be solid from the outset. Those of you saying, "Oh, wait a minute, he's the best scorer in college basketball. Like, why won't he have an impact right away? Like an enormous one? Like, why isn't his ceiling high?" Well, I don't think he's Brandon Miller. Despite similar averages in the same conference, Miller can be your offense, and he was a freshman doing it at Alabama for the best team in the country. I know they didn't win the championship, but for the regular season, they were the best team in the country, Alabama was. Knecht was, for better or worse, was a late bloomer and thrived as an older player in college basketball. So don't expect his numbers and role to be the same at the NBA level, but do expect productivity right off the outset. I think he's a candidate to be kind of like Jaime Jaquez Jr., one of those veteran players that has success right off the jump if he goes to the right place. And like I said, fit matters a lot, especially for the high ceiling guys, but it matters too for the high floor guys because they can do it right off the outset. Now, the final guy is Reed Sheppard, who I see as having a lower ceiling but a high floor. And I may be on the minority on this. Like, Sheppard can really shoot it. No ifs, ands, or buts. He has the intangibles, but if you're drafting pieces and not dudes in this class, so I just remember that you're drafting pieces, not dudes. So when I say he reminds me a little of Peyton Pritchard, even though I have Sheppard ranked 11th, don't say that's a failure of this class just because Pritchard's a bench player. Granted, he's a bench player on the best team in the NBA right now, but Pritchard is not an insult of a comparison to me because he's a really good shooter. He plays his role well. Reed Sheppard shot 50% from three, and that to me immediately translates. He shot 53% actually. And that translates. But the leap of faith that I think has to happen and makes me a little bit worried, it tempers my expectations, is to say that he's immediately an impact guy. And the reason I say that is because he would be an impact guy as a point guard. And that's a position that he hasn't played. So that tempers my expectations. And I think being a point guard is the only way he reaches his potential and reaches any sort of ceiling. But I think the shooting gives him an elevated floor, and the ceiling is too reliant on conjecture. And what I mean by that is it's uncertain. It's uncertain that he'll be a good point guard. You're taking so much of a leap of faith on his ceiling being hinged to his point guard success. And yes, I know a lot of NBA draft is projection, but you haven't seen him play point guard. And you'll be like, oh, well, Dillingham was there. And Leif, you have him number 2. But most people have Shepard ahead of Dillingham, and that's without having seen him play point guard. And he's also small. And I think his defense is a little bit overrated based off the numerical statistics, because I don't think he'll play the same defensive role that he played at Kentucky. Well, those are my guys, but I think he is a high floor guy. Well, those are the guys that we're guessing their roles in the NBA. So let's close out and talk about guys who have established NBA roles the Jazz could look at and look into as free agent targets in 2024. But first, a word from Monopoly Go. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already talked about that, but there's just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with with your friends for timed tournaments where you can work together, build up each other's boards. The more you win together, and the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get. Unique stickers you can trade to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique minigames like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it for free at Google Play or on the App Store. Game on. Welcome back in. Let's talk free agency and who is available. And not only who's available, but actually logical or feasible for the Jazz to go after and improve this team. Because I know I'm going to get people saying, well, why aren't you in on these guys? So I'll dispel those notions right off the top. First things first, I would love LeBron James or Paul George, but let's be realistic. I don't think those guys are coming to Utah. I don't think the Jazz make a play for the top free agents of the class because, as we discussed in the prior episodes, we need to be strategic about who and how we build around our team. Like, you have Lauri Markkanen, he figures the piece of the future. The rest, uncertain. But you got to be strategic about how to build that. So I don't think we're going to make too big of a splash in terms of the big names. So neither of those first guys, LeBron or Paul George, fit the timeline. Nor do Klay Thompson, nor does DeMar DeRozan, because they're all on the tail side of their career. Even James Harden. And I can't see us having a team that can win. And that seems like a shortcut. Not to mention, I don't think they'd be interested in going to teams that don't think they can win right away. So the first two names people will know that aren't those guys but are still at the top would be like Pascal Siakam. Siakam is an unrestricted free agent who has bird rights and is currently, according to my notes, paid about $34 million per year. And I could envision the Jazz making a play pairing two players around 30th best in the world, Lauri Markkanen and Pascal Siakam, to build around and play together. And I can talk myself into it partially. It's I don't know. But here's why. I can talk myself into it because I'm not all the way there, because he would stun some internal growth with Taylor Hendricks. And in particular, I think he moves the Jazz up to 7th or 8th in the West, but not really in a great spot to truly contend. And the Jazz probably want to be bad next year, quite frankly, because they'll probably be able to keep a top 8 pick, assuming the Jazz don't get horribly unlucky this year and fall out of the top 10 with under a 1% chance of that happening. And then they would convey early. But if the Jazz need to be in the top 8 in order to not convey next year to the Oklahoma City Thunder, and that becomes of the utmost important, because that's where I think the Jazz are most likely to get a star. So I'm a little bit out on the Siakam train, though I could talk myself into it somewhat. The next one that is an unrestricted free agent, whose name has admittedly soured, is Tobias Harris. Now, do I think there's something that can be said that he's uniquely criticized, and he's criticized harshly because he was paid over Jimmy Butler, which was a mistake. It was, but that doesn't mean the player is terrible. And he could be a good reclamation project in the sense that, okay, his name's devalued, so you can pay him a little bit, and he's a good player. But he's 32 years old next season, and He's a good player, but nowhere near what he is paid now and would be paid substantially less. But once again, I think he would take minutes of growth away from the Jazz's youthful pieces, which I perceive to be vital. And I think it's vital to internally develop Hendricks and Kessler along with George and whatever rookies the Jazz draft this year to be better suited for the Jazz when they hopefully draft the guy to build around in the 2025 draft, if not the 2024 one. Plus, as the assets become more near and you see what players are available, I think trades will happen more later with the Jazz's assets. Now, here are the first two guys I have legitimate interest in. The first one being unlikely, but worth a shot, and I'll explain the rationale and the nuance as to why I see it being a little bit different and fitting better, despite filling the same minutes as Siakam or Harris. And that's OG Anunoby, who I'll admit I've long hoped would be a Jazz man. I once said, I don't know if it was on a podcast or just with friends or on Twitter, but I wanted, if we had OG Anunoby in 2020 and 2021, the Jazz would have won a title. That's been my joke with my friends, but I meant it. So I'll admit he's long been on my wish list. He's 26 right now and a premier defender in the NBA and a solid offensive option in the NBA. Now, the Jazz I would not mind trying to make the Knicks overpay for him and match the offer sheet. That's what I would do because the Jazz have the money to spend and he could be an actor, an all NBA defensive player and actually become a tertiary option or a secondary option offensively for the Jazz to grow. And then also, I think as he grows, as the Jazz grow, he could be a vet leader to some of these wings. And I don't think Harris or Siakam fit that role as much because I think they want to win now, as does OG Anunoby. But OG Anunoby would welcome having an elevated role more than maybe those guys would who have had those elevated roles. I think the other pitch would be that the Jazz could find their on-ball leader, and it would not be a slight to Anunoby, who would grow with the Jazz, with Anunoby, with Markkanen, not redundant skill sets, both big guys. And now the Jazz find their on-ball leader, and I think that team has a couple players that are 26 through 30 in that core stretch of 4 years on the rookie contract of the potential stud, and he's also a big wing, and those guys are extremely useful, extremely valuable right now. And he's better than Harris right now, and he's younger and cheaper than Siakam. The next guy was his former teammate in Toronto, and that's Gary Trent Jr., who as of now is being overpaid. And he's 25 years old, getting about $17 million per year. But I think he could be paid similarly to that to have a slightly different role as a 3 or a 2 and complement Keontae in the backcourt. And he'd just be he'd be a 3 and D 2 guard, and he could play the 3 in some lineups should the Jazz draft a guard. So he doesn't necessarily hinder Keontae or Sensabaugh's growth or Hendricks' growth, but he could be slotted in different positions. I think he would actually really complement Keontae nicely in the backcourt because he's a very good defensive player, knocks down threes despite his poor shooting performance this past season relative to previous seasons he's had. And I think he's a player that you could have for a few years, and he'd be a good player to have as a piece. He's not a guy that you're gonna say, wow, this is the player that we need to change the course of our franchise. No, but you look at Kentavious Caldwell-Pope when he was with the Lakers, when he was with the Nuggets. Those guys had stars, obviously, but he's a perfect role player, and I think Gary Trent could have developed into that type of player in the later stages of his career, and he's pretty young right now, so that's worth a shot for me. And that would sharpen the youngsters that he plays next to, gives them competition, and he could be a 5th starter, maybe even a 4th starter. And if you're really good, maybe a 6th man. And that's not a sexy free agency target, but I think it's one that's useful. And the last guy I have long thought highly of is number 4 pick a few years ago, Patrick Williams. And that's just based on the flashes. I liked him out of Florida State, but he's got more and more flashes that you see as a young, useful player. And he's skillful. He's hardworking by all accounts. He just can't catch a break with the injury bug. That's where the reservations would come from. And he could, a lot of players that are young and hardworking struggle in one environment and really excel in another. Like Lauri Markkanen struggled in Chicago, had a poor numerical season in Cleveland despite playing a different role, comes to Utah, and then he's an all-star. I'm not saying that's obviously going to happen. I'm not saying this is plainly, clearly going to happen whatsoever, but it could. And he's one of those guys that has that upside to make that possible. Williams, you may have to pay handsomely for as he's a restricted free agent, but he's worth a shot. And then on the safe side, I wouldn't mind trying to get a veteran player. I think for Williams, what you would try to do is you'd say, okay, we're going to overpay slightly for him, make the Bulls match us, and then you'd probably go for Trent. And you'd say, well, you know what? We're getting a number 4 player who's a little disgruntled. We'll give him a new future. And maybe that we treat him as our lottery pick and you pay him a little extra, but the Jazz have room to do so. I think they're going to shed some salary. THT is not returning, and you pay him 15, 16 mil, and now you're only playing a better player than THT was, $4 million more than THT had. And so really it's only a $4 million difference. I don't think that quite does the job, but I would ask OG Anunoby first, probably going to get declined. I would ask Patrick Williams, but I'd really make a push for Gary Trent. And then the last kind of player or archetype I would try is I'd try to get a vet who's more of the grooming side of their career, meaning that they don't want all these minutes, they don't want the money as much. They maybe have played on contenders, but now don't figure to play on contenders, like Nick Batum. So maybe you ask Nick Batum to groom Taylor Hendricks, cultivate that ball of clay, and mold him into becoming a really useful player for the years to come when the Jazz are ready to contend. Those are my targets. Let me know what you guys think. Are there guys I'm missing? Are there guys that you think I got right, but I don't have the money evaluation right? Let me know. So that'll do it for me. And thanks for making Locked On Jazz your first listen. And listen to Locked On NBA for great playoff coverage. And I also implore you guys to check this out. Locked On has launched their first ever National Sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On Plus, our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. So thank you guys again for listening. It's always a pleasure chatting with you guys. I can't wait to talk to you from the Combine, and I'll be giving you updates on the players who look good, the players who don't look so good, and everything all over Jazz related, of course, covering the ping pong balls, the way they bounce, and praying the Jazz end up doing well when the ping pong balls eventually settle. But thank you guys for listening. I'll be back again with you tomorrow with more offseason Jazz talk. And as always, go Jazz.